You just made the worst traffic stop of your career, son, and I'm going to need you to step aside while I finish what I came here to do." When Officer Brandon Holt pulled over a dusty, bearded biker on Route 9 outside Tucson, he expected a warrant, maybe a drunk, maybe nothing at all. What he got was a name on a license that made every cop in the building go very, very quiet. But Sergeant Elena Vasquez, 12-year veteran and the only officer who thought to ask why the man refused to file a complaint, is about to discover that the traffic stop was never an accident, and that the man on the motorcycle has been watching this station for 3 months, building a case against people Elena has spent years protecting without knowing it. One file, one name she never expected to see, one choice that will cost her everything she thought she'd earned. The call came through on Channel 4 at 17 minutes past 5, the way bad calls always did during the shift change, when everyone was half in and half out of their heads, signing paperwork with one hand and reaching for car keys with the other. Brandon Holt's voice on the radio was too loud, the way young officers got when they wanted an audience. "Dispatch, I've got a stop on Route 9, mile marker 22. Single rider Harley-Davidson plates coming back clean, but the operator is..." A pause. Theatrical, the kind a man rehearses. Not exactly presenting as a law-abiding citizen. Sergeant Elena Vasquez was at her desk in the bullpen when she heard it, and something about the pause made her set down her coffee. Not the words, the pause. Brandon Holt had been with the Maricopa County Sheriff's satellite station for 14 months, and in that time he had developed a particular habit of making routine stops sound like felony arrests. She had corrected him twice in writing and once in the parking lot close enough that no one else could hear in the flat voice she reserved for corrections she meant. He had nodded both times and learned nothing. She picked up her radio. "Holt, what's the basis for the stop?" A beat. "Equipment violation, Sergeant. Cracked taillight." "Copy that." She held the radio a moment longer, then set it down. Outside, the late afternoon sun was doing what Tucson sun did in October, turning everything the color of old copper, beautiful and unforgiving at the same time. She could hear the ceiling fan in the break room cycling through its loose rotation. She could hear Deputy Reyes arguing with the vending machine about a bag of pretzels. Everything was exactly as ordinary as it always was at 5:17 on a Thursday. She was in her car by 5:19. She told herself it was routine supervision. She told herself it was because Brandon Holt had a history of escalating stops that did not need escalating, and that she was doing her job as a field supervisor, nothing more. She told herself this for approximately 4 miles, which was how long it took to reach mile marker 22 on Route 9, where she pulled up to find Brandon Holt standing in the middle of the road shoulder with his thumbs in his belt and his chest puffed out in a way that she recognized immediately as the posture of a man performing for someone he had already decided was beneath him. The motorcycle was a '98 Harley Sportster, the kind of bike that had once been somebody's pride and was now just transportation. The chrome dulled to a chalky gray. The leather on the seat cracked along the seat seam in 2 places. The man sitting on it, not standing sitting, which was itself a statement, was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders, with 3 or 4 days of gray threaded beard and a canvas jacket that had seen a lot of weather. His hands were resting on his thighs, not on the handlebars, not hidden. He was watching Brandon Holt the way a person watches a weather forecast they've already seen. Unimpressed. Completely, utterly unimpressed. Elena stepped out of her cruiser and walked toward them, keeping her pace even. Brandon didn't look over. He was in the middle of something, and he wanted to finish it. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to step off the bike." "You asked me once," the man said. His voice was unhurried, a low baritone that carried without effort, like a man used to being listened to. "And I told you I'd be happy to provide my documentation right here. I'm not stepping off the bike because I don't need to step off the bike. Equipment violation, you said. You can look at the taillight from where you're standing." Brandon's jaw tightened in a way Elena could see from 6 feet away. "I have the right to ask you to dismount for officer safety." "You have the discretion to ask. the man said with the specific precision of someone who knew exactly what the law said and what it didn't. "That's not the same thing. My hands are visible. I'm not reaching for anything. You have my compliance on the stop. Request my license, I'll give it to you." He paused, and something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile. "Sir." Elena stopped beside Brandon. She looked at the man on the bike. He looked at her, and something happened in that look that she couldn't immediately categorize. It was not the look of a man surprised to see a superior officer arrive, and it was not the look of a man relieved. It was the look of a man who had already known she would come, had already factored her arrival into whatever calculation he was running behind those calm, winter-gray eyes. "Sergeant," Brandon said without looking at her, "I've got this." "I can see that," she said in a voice that meant the opposite. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Elena Vasquez. Can I ask where you're headed this evening?" "Tucson proper," the man said. "I have an address on Mesquite Lane. I've been staying there for about 3 weeks." He reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket, slowly, deliberately, with the body language of a man who had been around enough weapons to know how to move near them, and produced a slim leather wallet. He opened it and extended his license through the air between them, not to Brandon, but to Elena. As if Brandon were not the ranking decision-maker in this stop. As if he had already made a calculation about who in this roadside tableau was worth talking to. Brandon stepped in and intercepted it. He looked at the license, and he stopped talking. Elena watched his face. She had learned to read officers the way she read crime scenes, for what was out of place, for what was missing. What was missing from Brandon Holt's face in that moment was everything that had been there a minute ago. The performance, the posture, the particular species of confidence that young officers wore like borrowed clothing. It drained out of him as she watched. His mouth opened and then closed. "What is it?" Elena asked. He held the license out to her without a word. She took it. The name on the license was Declan Rowe. Below it, in the small field that most licenses left, to height and weight and eye color, was an address in Phoenix. None of that explained Brandon's face. What explained Brandon's face was something Brandon knew, and Elena was about to figure out, which was that the name Declan Rowe appeared on a brass plaque on the 4th floor of the Federal Building in downtown Phoenix. It appeared on the citation for the Officer Excellence in Leadership Award that hung in the lobby of the State Law Enforcement Training Academy in Scottsdale. It appeared at the bottom of the updated use of force policy that every officer in Maricopa County had been trained on 18 months ago, because Declan Rowe had written it. Former Regional Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Western Division. Retired 8 months ago. Architect of the statewide law enforcement ethics review that had resulted in 6 internal affairs investigations and 3 high-profile terminations. Elena looked up from the license. The man on the Harley was watching her the way he had watched her when she arrived, with that quality of already knowing, of having run the numbers and arrived at a conclusion before the conversation started. But there was something else in his face now, something much smaller and more carefully controlled. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something that looked under 3 days of road dust and gray beard a great deal like exhaustion. "Mr. Rowe," Elena said. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, and he said her name the same way she'd said his, without surprise, without the slight uptick at the end that meant he was reading it for the first time, which meant he'd known her name before she gave it to him. She looked at him. He looked at her. Brandon Holt stood between them, making no sound whatsoever, which was the most useful thing he'd done all afternoon. "I'm going to need to see the taillight," Elena said finally, because something in the situation required her to say something procedural, something that kept them all on the ground where normal interactions happened. "And then I think we're going to let you get back on the road, Mr. Rowe." "I'd appreciate that," he said. She walked around the bike. The taillight had a crack running from the upper left to the lower right, maybe 2 inches long. The kind of crack that let in moisture and eventually failed, but was not currently failing. It was technically an equipment violation. It was also the kind of equipment violation that 1 officer in 100 would stop to cite, and then only if something else had caught their eye first. She came back around. "I'm going to let you go with a warning on the taillight. I'd get that looked at within the next few days." She handed the license back to him, not to Brandon. "Is there anything else you need from us this evening, Mr. Rowe?" He took the license and tucked it away. He looked at her for one beat longer than he needed to. "No," he said. Then, quieter, in a register Brandon probably couldn't catch, "Not yet." He started the bike. The Sportster's engine was louder than the chassis suggested it should be. A deep, irregular percussion that had traveled a lot of miles and had opinions about it. He pulled back onto Route 9 and was gone inside 30 seconds, the copper light swallowing him the way desert light swallowed everything it wanted to keep. Elena stood on the shoulder and watched the spot where he'd been. "Sergeant," Brandon said behind her. His voice had lost all its earlier shape. "I didn't know who he was." "No," she said. She turned and walked back to her cruiser. "You didn't look." She got in and closed the door, and sat there for a moment with the engine off, watching the highway through the windshield, turning over the thing that was bothering her. Not the name, not the look on Brandon's face. The look on Declan Rowe's face when she'd arrived. The way he had said her name. The way he had said, with precisely calibrated quietness, "Not yet." She drove back to the station. By the time she pulled into the parking lot, someone had already made the call. She could tell because the bullpen had that particular quality of stillness that happened when people were trying to look like they weren't paying attention to something they were absolutely paying attention to. Deputy Reyes was at his computer, with his back too straight. Deputy Montoya had found something very interesting in the filing cabinet near the window that faced the parking lot. Lieutenant Greer was standing in the doorway of his office, with his arms crossed and his face assembled into an expression of careful neutrality that Elena had learned over 9 years of watching him meant he was not feeling neutral at all. "Heard you caught Holt's stop," he said. "Supervision," she said. "Hell of a stop to supervise." He said it lightly, with the easy grin that Harris Greer wore the way other men wore watches. Always there, always slightly too polished. "You know who that was?" "I read the license." "Right." He nodded slowly. "Well, old Declan Rowe, retired, riding his bike around the desert." He said it like a conclusion, a nice tidy one with a bow on it. "Good thing he's out of the business." Elena looked at him. "Why's that?" Something moved behind the grin, fast and gone. "Man like that? You don't want him with active jurisdiction running around causing trouble for hard-working local departments." He said it like a joke. He delivered it like a man testing the temperature of a room. "He didn't cause any trouble," Elena said. "He provided his documentation and waited for the stop to be completed." "Of course he did." The grin broadened. "Because that's who he is. Man always plays by the book." He uncrossed his arms. "Get some paperwork done, Elena. It's been a long Thursday." She went to her desk. She sat down. She looked at her computer screen without seeing it. She thought about the way Greer had said the man's name, not surprised, not reading it for the first time either. "Not yet," Declan Rowe had said. She pulled up her own work queue and stared at it. Reyes had fixed his pretzel problem and was eating at his desk. The ceiling fan turned. The sun finished going down outside the window, and the copper went out of the sky, and everything in the station settled back into the particular ordinary it had been before mile marker 22 on Route 9. Except that it hadn't quite, and Elena knew it, and she was not yet sure what to do with that knowing. She pulled Declan Rowe's name up in the system. No warrants, no priors, a Phoenix address. Nothing that explained what a retired FBI regional director was doing on a cracked taillight Harley on a back road outside Tucson. She stared at the screen for a while. Then she closed the window and went back to her paperwork, because sometimes that was all you could do. But she noted the address on Mesquite Lane. She noted it without writing it down the way she'd learned to note things she wasn't sure she wanted anyone to see her noting. Just in case. Brandon Holt found her at the coffee machine at 6:45. The station was quieter now, The evening shift settling in, half the desks empty, and the other half occupied by people doing the kind of slow, end-of-the-week work that didn't require conversation. He came in sideways, like he wasn't quite committing to the room, and poured himself a cup without meeting her eye.
"I want to say something," he said. Elena watched the coffee go into his cup.
"Then say it." "I didn't know." He turned the cup in his hands. "Obviously, but I'm not going to pretend the stop was fully by the book." She looked at him then, because that was not what she'd expected. Brandon Holt was 27 years old and had been told his whole career that he was exactly what law enforcement needed, which had done him no favors in terms of learning from anything. She had spent 14 months waiting for him to say something that didn't sound like a press release. Define not fully by the book. "I hit my lights before I confirmed the taillight from a distance," he said. "I saw the bike, I saw him, and I made a call before I had a visual basis. There it was." She turned to face him. "What did you see?" He had the grace to look at the floor. An older guy on a beat-up bike with road gear and a beard. "I profiled." He said the word flatly, without drama, the way a doctor said a diagnosis. "I know what I did. I'm telling you because you'd find out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me." Elena let the silence sit for a moment, the way silence worked better than words sometimes, especially with someone who was in the process of doing something difficult. "Did you document the initial basis for the stop correctly?" "I wrote up the taillight." "Brandon." "I know." He put the cup down on the counter without drinking from it. "I'll amend the report to reflect the actual sequence of observation." "You will," she said, "and you'll do it tonight before you leave. And then you're going to come talk to me next week about what implicit bias training you've done in the last 6 months and what you plan to do differently." She kept her voice even, not angry. Anger was easy. Anger let people off the hook by giving them something to react to. "This isn't a write-up. This is a conversation that needs to happen, and then a practice that needs to change. You understand the difference?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good." She picked up her own coffee. "Go fix your report." He left. She drank her coffee and stared at the wall above the machine, where someone had taped up a reminder about the parking validation procedure that had been there so long the tape had gone amber. She thought about what Brandon had just done, walking in here saying the thing out loud before he had to, and she tried to figure out what she felt about it. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not exoneration. Something more like a crack in a wall she hadn't realized was there. She thought about the man on the motorcycle, about calm, winter-gray eyes that had looked at her arrival on that roadside as though he had already accounted for it. She had been a police officer for 12 years. She had started in Mesa, moved to Phoenix for 3 years, and come to this satellite station 8 years ago, when Solis had called her personally and offered her a field supervisor position, which was unusual enough that she'd been flattered. Captain Raymond Solis was known in the county as a straight shooter, fair-minded, the kind of commander who backed his people when backing them was correct, and didn't when it wasn't. She had trusted his judgment on cases on personnel on the 100 small calls that a station commander made in a week that no one saw from the outside. She had trusted him more than she'd trusted anyone else in the department, partly because of his record, and partly because he was the only commander she'd ever worked for who had never once made her feel like she had to prove something extra to be taken seriously. Trust like that was not easy to build. It was not easy to examine either. It had a quality of immovability that was very close to the quality of a load-bearing wall. You didn't poke at it because you understood at some level that a lot of things were resting on top of it. She went back to her desk and finished the evening's paperwork. At 8:15, Captain Solis came out of his office in his jacket, ready to leave. He stopped by her desk the way he sometimes did at the end of the day. "Heard it was an interesting afternoon," he said. "Supervision keeps you on your toes," she said. He smiled the warm, tired smile of a man who had been at this a long time. "Declan Rowe." He said the name with what sounded like admiration, the specific admiration of a colleague for someone who had done important work. "That man spent 20 years making our jobs harder and easier at the same time." The ethics review was not comfortable for anybody, but he wasn't wrong about what needed fixing. He paused. You talked to him? Briefly, at the scene. Good. If he reaches out to the station for anything at all, just loop me in, all right? Man has his own way of operating, and it helps to know when he's around. He said it in the casual tone he used for administrative reminders. Have a good evening, Elena. Night, Captain. She watched him go. She sat very still for a moment. That was the second person today who had responded to the name Declan Rowe with something that looked like one emotion and contained another. She had been a detective for 4 of her 12 years before she moved into supervision, and she knew what it looked like when people performed reactions instead of having them. She had seen Greer perform calm concern. She had seen Solis perform warm respect. She pulled up the report she'd written on the stop. She read it once, then again. Then she pulled up the file for a set of drug interdiction operations from the previous 3 months, specifically 3 pre-dawn raids where the targets had been gone before arrival. She had looked at this file twice before, and each time reached the same conclusion. Bad intel early, departure the kind of operational misfires that happened in the ordinary course of investigative work. Twice was a coincidence. 3 times was a pattern. But she had not been ready to call it a pattern. She opened the file. She read through the operational reports. She made a note about the timestamps not in the official system and the small spiral notebook she kept in her left desk drawer, the one she wrote in by hand when she wasn't sure she wanted a digital trail. She wrote down 3 numbers and 1 question mark, and she stared at what she'd written for a full minute. Then she closed the notebook, locked the drawer, and went home. She did not sleep especially well. The next morning came in through her kitchen window the way Tucson mornings did in October. A gray coolness that burned off fast, leaving bright blue and dry heat by 9. Elena made her coffee, drank it standing over the sink, and thought about 3 raids and 3 empty rooms, and a man on a motorcycle who had known her name. She was at her desk by 7:45. The station was still in its morning configuration, coffee brewing, the day shift filtering in the particular low-frequency energy of a place coming awake. Greer wasn't in yet. Solis was already in his office with the door closed, which was not unusual. Brandon Holt came in at 8, saw her, and went directly to his desk without the sideways drift of someone avoiding her, which meant he had fixed the report last night and felt better about himself. She appreciated the efficiency of that. She was reading through a traffic accident report that needed her signature when the front desk called back to tell her she had a visitor. Name, she said. Rowe, the desk officer said. Declan Rowe. Says he knows you from yesterday. Elena set the accident report down and took a breath that was not exactly slow and not exactly fast. Send him back, she said. He came through the bullpen door like he owned the square footage, which was not about arrogance. It was the thing that happened when a person had spent enough years in spaces like this that they stopped needing to orient themselves. He was wearing clean clothes today, a gray canvas shirt and dark jeans, and he had shaved, which changed his face more than she'd expected. Without the road beard, he looked less like a man who'd been sleeping outdoors and more like a man who had made a considered decision to look like one. The winter gray eyes were the same. The quality of attention behind them was the same. He sat down in the chair beside her desk without being invited, which she noted, and put both hands flat on his thighs, which she also noted. A specific body language choice. Hands visible, nothing concealed. Mr. Rowe, she said. Declan, he said. Please, Mr. Rowe was my father, and he was considerably more patient than I am. He looked around the bullpen with the measured look of a man cataloging. You're here early. So are you. I wanted to catch you before the day got complicated. He looked back at her. I have a question for you, Sergeant, and I'm going to ask you to take it seriously, even though it's going to sound like I'm testing you. Which I am, but not the way you think. Elena folded her hands on the desk. Ask. Operation Crestline, he said. She kept her face still. Operation Crestline was a drug interdiction operation from 7 months ago. before the pattern of empty rooms had started. It had resulted in a successful arrest Marcus Vega, mid-level distributor, currently awaiting trial. It was also the operation that had originally raised a flag in her mind about the informant chain, a flag she had brought to Greer, and which Greer had walked her through to her satisfaction at the time. She had not thought about Operation Crestline in 4 months. "What about it?" she said. "Where did the intel originate?" "Confidential source, run through Lieutenant Greer's informant network." "Who logged it?" She looked at him. "You have access to our operational files." "I have access to a lot of things," he said, without inflection, without apology. "That's not the question I asked." "Greer logged it," she said, "with Solis's sign-off." She paused. "Which is standard procedure. Is it standard procedure for the station commander to personally sign off on every informant log?" She opened her mouth and closed it. In 8 years at this station, she had assumed the answer was yes, because she had seen Solis's signature on those documents. She had never asked whether that was required or voluntary. She had never asked because she had never needed the answer. Or so she had believed. "I don't know," she said, and she said it honestly, because she had learned that the most dangerous thing in police work was pretending to know things you didn't. Declan nodded, as if this were an acceptable answer. "You keep a personal log," he said. It was not a question. She looked at him sharply. "Most supervisors keep notes?" "I know," he said. "I'm one of them." He leaned forward very slightly, dropping his voice a register. "Sergeant Vasquez, I'm going to tell you something that I am choosing to tell you specifically. Not Lieutenant Greer, not Captain Solis. You. And I need you to understand that I'm telling you this because I have read your jacket, your fitness reports, your incident history, and your commendation file. And because I was in this county for 6 weeks before I let Officer Holt pull me over. And in 6 weeks, I have watched 8 different officers at this station, and you are the only one who has done the specific combination of things I need someone in this building to have done." He paused. "Are you listening?" "You have my full attention," Elena said, and it was true in a way that very few things were fully true. "There is an active federal investigation targeting personnel at this station," he said. "I am part of that investigation. My presence in Tucson is not recreational. The stop yesterday was from a certain angle useful to me, though not in the way Officer Holt intended." He sat back. "That's what I'm going to tell you right now. That's all I'm going to tell you right now." The bullpen went on around them, Reyes at his desk, Montoya walking through with a file folder, the coffee machine cycling into its next pot. Normal morning, normal station. Elena looked at the man across from her and felt the particular sensation she associated with moments when the architecture of what you knew shifted without warning. Not collapse, but a slow, definitive alteration of the load-bearing walls. "Why tell me at all?" she said. "Because in approximately 72 hours, things at this station are going to change, in ways that will require someone on the inside to have made a decision about which side of the line they're standing on before the change happens. And I need to know you've had the information to make that decision. You're not asking me to do anything." "Not yet," he said, and the words landed with the same weight as they had on the roadside the day before, because they were the same words, and he knew she'd recognize them, and that recognition was itself a message. He stood up. "Thank you for your time, Sergeant." He said it at normal volume, the conversation folding back into ordinary professional courtesy, the way a knife folds back into its handle. "Mr. Rowe," she said. He paused. "Operation Crestline, the informant log. Did Solis's sign-off happen the same day the intel came in, or the next day?" Something changed in Declan's face so briefly that she almost missed it, and she had been watching carefully. It was not surprise. It was something closer to satisfaction, but underneath it something else, something careful and measuring, and not entirely pleased. "Same day," he said. 2 hours after intake." She looked at him. "Standard turnaround is 48 hours minimum. Solis always went 24 at least for anything significant. I noted it at the time and didn't follow up. She paused. You asked me about Crestline because you wanted to know if I'd noticed that. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Have a good day, Sergeant Vasquez. He left. Elena sat at her desk for 1 full minute without touching anything. Then she opened the bottom left drawer, took out her spiral notebook, and wrote 2 more things next to the 3 numbers and the question mark she'd written last night. She wrote, CL sign-off, same day, 2 hours. And beneath it, she wrote a name she had written 0 times in 12 years of notes. Solace. She stared at the name. She felt the load-bearing wall shift another 1/4 inch, and the feeling was not like discovery. It was like grief. She put the notebook back. She picked up the accident report and signed it. She did her job because there was still a job to do, and it still required doing. And because Elena Vasquez had learned a long time ago that the work did not stop because the world had lurched sideways. But she kept the notebook locked. And at lunch, when the bullpen was thinned out and she had 20 minutes, she pulled up the Crestline file and made a copy, not through the system, but physically on the printer in the supply room, the one without the network logging that IT had never gotten around to configuring. She put it in her bag. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself this without quite believing it. The afternoon brought the usual inventory of minor crises, a shoplifting call that turned into a domestic dispute, a fender bender on the interstate access road involving a semi and a pickup truck with a cracked axle, a noise complaint from a retirement community that turned out to be a retirement community having a birthday party, which was not technically a noise complaint, but wasn't nothing either. Elena managed her shift with half her attention on these things and half on a pattern she was now not able to unsee. The way Greer moved through the bullpen with a quality of awareness that she had always read as attentiveness and was now rereading as surveillance. The way he knew where people were. The way he positioned himself when calls came in, always somewhere with a sight line to the communications desk. She had worked beside Harris Greer for 8 years. She had liked him, mostly. He was competent, reasonable in his moods, funny when he chose to be. He had never done anything in her presence that she would have called corrupt. She had never seen money change hands, never heard a conversation that required ignoring. She had seen now that she was looking at it differently, a man who was very good at not being seen. At 4:30, Greer came to her desk. You talked to Roe this morning? He said. Not a question. She looked up. He came in with a question about a traffic matter. Straightforward. What kind of question? Procedural. He wanted to know about the complaint process if he'd wanted to file something about the stop. She said it cleanly, flatly, with the texture of truth, because most of it was. I told him the form number, and he thanked me and left. Greer nodded. He looked at her desk, at the stack of reports at the closed bottom drawer. She watched him not look at the closed bottom drawer. If he comes back, Greer said, loop me in. Guy like that, retired or not, you don't want to handle solo. Of course, she said. He went back to his office. She turned back to her screen. She thought, 2 people in 2 days have told me to loop them in if Declan Rowe makes contact. 2 people who have not spoken to each other about this as far as I can tell, because they don't know I've compared the 2 requests. And the man who actually told me the truth told me to tell no one. She thought I am not sure this is a choice I get to delay much longer. She did not yet know how right she was about that. That evening, leaving the station, she checked the Mesquite Lane address she'd memorized. It was 6 blocks from the station, 12 minutes walk. She drove past it without stopping, a small rental house with a truck parked outside and no lights visible through the front window. She did not stop. She drove home. She ate dinner standing over her counter. She sat on her back porch in the dark for a while, listening to the desert settle around her, the dry click and whisper of things alive and invisible in the brush beyond her fence. She thought about a badge number and an informant log and a sign-off 2 hours after intake. She thought about a man who had read her jacket, her fitness reports, her incident history, her commendation file, and chosen her. She thought, the question is not whether something is wrong. The question is whether I am the person who does something about it. She had asked herself this question once before. She had been 26, and she had answered it, and the answer had cost her 2 years of isolation that she would not wish on anyone. She had answered it correctly. She had answered it at great personal cost, and then she had spent the next decade being very, very careful about which questions she let herself ask. She went inside. She took the Crestline copy out of her bag and put it under the false bottom of the box she kept her gun cleaning kit in, which was the least likely thing in her house to be casually examined. She was not sure why she felt the need to hide it. She was not sure she wanted to examine that feeling too closely. She slept better than she expected to. She had made a decision without quite articulating it, and decisions, even unmade ones, cleared the air. On the first day, nothing happened that she could point to, which was itself a thing she could point to. A quality of held breath about the station, a calibration of normalcy that was slightly too precise. On the second day, there was a staff meeting about Q4 budget allocation that Solis ran with his usual brisk efficiency, and Elena sat in it and watched him, and tried to square what she knew with what she saw, and could not yet, not entirely. On the third day, a call came in at 3:40 in the morning about a domestic disturbance on the east side, and Elena, who was not on call, lay awake in her bed and listened to the radio dispatch it and thought about patterns. The raid, that was not a raid, happened on the third day's afternoon. It was a scheduled drug interdiction targeting a distribution point in a warehouse off the Industrial Access Road near the airport, a location flagged by Greer's informant network, the same network that had produced Operation Crestline, the same network that had produced the 3 empty rooms over the previous 3 months. Elena was not the lead on the operation. She was there as field supervisor, which meant she arrived in the second wave after the entry team had cleared the building. She walked into a warehouse that smelled of motor oil and hot concrete, and the particular scent of recent evacuation takeout containers still warm in a trash can, a coffee mug with a ring of dried residue that was less than an hour old, folding chairs not yet returned to their stacked position against the wall. They'd been there, they'd left. 20 minutes before the entry team hit the door, she estimated from the coffee residue, which she photographed with her phone before the scene was formally processed. Greer was on the radio sounding professionally disappointed, the way he always sounded professionally disappointed, convincingly enough that she had believed it twice. She stood in the empty warehouse and looked at the folding chairs and the warm trash can and felt something crystallize in her chest that was not quite anger and not quite fear, and was the specific compound of both that she associated with the moments in her career when she could no longer give anyone the benefit of the doubt. She photographed everything she could without drawing attention to the photographing. She logged it on her phone, not in the department system. She drove back to the station, and that evening at 7:15, her personal cell phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. "Can you meet me?" Declan Rose said. "In approximately 40 minutes at the Sunrise Diner on Alameda?" She sat in her car in the station parking lot. Through the windshield, she could see the light on in Greer's office. "How did you get this number?" "Your contact information is in the county directory that the Federal Liaison Office has access to," he said. "I apologize for the hour and the lack of warning. Both are intentional." "You're concerned your communications are being monitored?" she said. "I'm concerned about a lot of things," he said. 40 minutes, Sergeant." 45, she said. "I have to stop somewhere first." The somewhere first was a copy shop on Ena Road, where she made 2 copies of the Crestline file she'd been carrying and mailed one in a plain envelope to her brother in Flagstaff with a note that said, "Put this somewhere safe. Don't ask me why yet." Her brother was a civil engineer with no law enforcement connections and absolutely no inclination to involve himself in anything complicated, which made him the safest storage option she had. She mailed the second copy to her own P.O. box and kept the original. The Sunrise Diner was the kind of place that existed in every mid-sized city. Booths with cracked vinyl, coffee that was always better than you expected, a cook who had been there since the Reagan administration and had no opinions about the customers. She got there in 43 minutes and found Declan already in a booth at the back facing the door, with coffee in front of him and the particular quality of stillness of someone running a very precise calculation about time. She slid in across from him. The waitress came and Elena ordered coffee. When the waitress left, Declan looked at her and said simply, "Tell me about this afternoon." She told him. She described the coffee residue and the folding chairs and the warm trash can. She told him about the photograph timestamps on her phone. She did not look away from his face while she talked, because she was watching for the thing she was watching for, which was whether this information was new to him. It was not. "You already knew," she said. "I knew the operation had been compromised before it went out," he said. "I knew the location had been cleared within 22 minutes of the briefing. I was watching the access road." He said it without apology, without performance. "I needed to see your reaction to the result. I needed to see whether you photographed the scene before it was processed, and whether you photographed it in a way that was consistent with someone documenting evidence or with someone documenting cover." She looked at him across the table. "You were testing me again?" "Yes." "By letting me walk into an operation you knew was already burned?" "Yes." She felt the heat of that move through her, and then settle. Not explosion. The slow burn that was more dangerous than explosion. "You could have told me. We could have—" "No," he said, and his voice didn't harden so much as deepen, like a river finding its channel. "If I had told you, your behavior at the scene would have been the behavior of someone who had been told. I needed the behavior of someone who figured it out themselves. Those are two completely different data points, Sergeant." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry that it required you to walk into a burned operation. I'm not sorry for the information I needed from it." She drank her coffee. She made herself think through the anger, not past it, but through it, because that was how she handled things she couldn't afford to waste on heat. He was right about the data point. She knew he was right, which was the more aggravating part. 4 operations, she said. 4 compromised in the same pattern. Greer's network. "Greer is part of it," Declan said. "He is not the top of it." The diner noise went on around them. Someone's kid was complaining about the menu at a booth near the door. The cook was doing something involving a spatula and strong opinions. Elena looked at the man across from her, the man who had sat on a roadside on a cracked taillight motorcycle for 20 minutes, being called sir by a boy who thought he was nobody, because it was useful. And she tried to figure out where the line was between the respect she was starting to feel for him and the distrust she had not yet entirely set down. "Who is above Greer?" she said. He looked at her. He picked up his coffee cup. He put it down. And he said, "There are things I'm not in a position to tell you yet. Not because I don't trust you. Because the value of what you know is directly proportional to your ability to react to it without preparation in a situation where preparation would give you away." She stared at him. "You just told me you can't tell me something by explaining exactly why you can't tell me, which means I'm supposed to figure out what the something is from the shape of the hole you just left." Something crossed his face that was for the first time uncalculated. It lasted about a second, and it was very close to amusement, and it made him look for that 1 second like a person rather than a mechanism. "You're good at your job," he said quietly. "I know," she said with more heat than she intended. "I know you know," he said. "That's why I'm here." They sat with that for a moment. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Right now, nothing. Continue your shift pattern. Don't alter your behavior toward Greer or anyone else at the station. If anyone asks about meeting me, we discuss the complaint process, and you have not seen me since. And when right now becomes something else, I'll contact you." He paused. "I need to ask you something personal, Sergeant, and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable." She waited. "Captain Solis," he said. "Tell me who he is to you, professionally." She felt the load-bearing wall again, that slow shift, that almost physical sensation of weight redistributing. "He's my commanding officer," she said. "He recruited me to this station. He has been, in my experience, a fair and honest commander." "In your experience," Declan said. "Yes. Is there anything in your experience of him that doesn't fit that description? Anything at any point that you set aside because it didn't fit the overall picture you'd formed? She sat with the question. She sat with it the way she sat with hard questions, which was to let them find their level rather than pushing them. The operational sign-off, the 2-hour turnaround, the thing she'd called standard procedure before she knew to ask whether it was. The warmth of his recruitment call, which he had not thought about in years, the way he had specifically sought her out at the Phoenix division, specifically called her in for the supervisor position, specifically made a case for her coming to this station. She had been 29. She had just survived 2 years of professional isolation for doing the right thing. A respected commander calling to offer her something she had felt then like someone had finally recognized who she was. "Nothing I can tell you right now," she said. It was the truest thing she could say. Declan looked at her. In the light of the diner, without the road dust and the beard, she could see him more clearly. The specific kind of tired that wasn't about sleep. The kind that accumulated in people who had been operating alone in high-stakes situations for too long. She recognized it because she had felt versions of it herself, but his ran deeper. His had years in it. "Okay," he said. He put money on the table for both coffees. "I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to leave first, and I'd like you to wait 15 minutes before you go." "Understood. The thing I'm going to say is this. I'm going to give you something at some point before this concludes that you will not expect me to give you. Not because I believe in dramatic timing, but because the right moment for it is not yet. When I give it to you, I need you to use it not to protect me and not to protect yourself, but because it's the right thing to do with it." He looked at her. "That's all I can tell you." She held his gaze. "You're asking me to trust you." "I'm telling you I'm going to earn it," he said. "Those are different things." He left $40 on the table, put on his jacket, and walked out of the diner. Elena watched him go. She sat for 15 minutes and 3/4 of a cup of coffee. And she thought about the shape of a hole and what you could learn from its edges. And she thought about a name she'd written in her notebook, a name she'd known for 8 years and was only now beginning to read differently. At 9:15, she drove home. She checked her locks. She put the original Crestline copy under the gun kit and sat on her bed and took out her phone and looked at the photographs from the warehouse, the coffee residue, and the folding chairs, and the warm trash can. She looked at the timestamps. She thought, I have been inside this station for 8 years, and in 8 years I have done my job with the conviction that the people I trusted were worth trusting. And now I am sitting alone in my house with evidence hidden in my kitchen, and a name in a notebook, and a retired federal officer who will not tell me the most important thing he knows because he needs to see what I do when I find out without preparation. She thought, I have been in this situation before. I was 26, and the stakes were a colleague and 2 years of my career. I am 38 now, and the stakes are something I haven't fully quantified, and the question is the same one. She set the phone down. She lay back on her bed in her work clothes. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her, and made herself breathe slowly in and out the way she'd learned from the one meditation app she'd ever tried and never deleted. She was almost asleep when something surfaced from the day's accumulation that hadn't fully registered in the moment at the warehouse on the walk back to her cruiser. Greer had been on the radio with a voice perfectly calibrated to professional disappointment, but his phone, she had seen his phone in his jacket pocket. The edge of it, catching the warehouse light, had shown the bright, white notification flash of a message received. In the same window when the entry team had confirmed the scene was empty. A message that he had not acknowledged, had not reached for, because reaching for it in that moment would have looked like exactly what it was. She sat up. She found her notebook. She wrote, G, phone notification during clearance, confirm, did not acknowledge. She stared at what she'd written. She thought the warning came from inside the building. She did not sleep for a very long time after that. The call from Declan came on the 5th morning, not to her phone, but to her car. She found a folded note under the windshield wiper when she came out of the station at 11:15. during the shift overlap when the parking lot was busy enough that someone moving through it attracted no particular attention. The note had an address and a time, 2 o'clock, a storage facility on the south side of town, and nothing else. She went back inside. She did her job for 2 hours and 45 minutes. She handled a call about a vehicle theft that resolved into a vehicle that had been lent to a cousin, and a call about a neighbor who turned out to be a legal occupant, and the 700 small bureaucratic actions that constituted a Thursday in field supervision. She did all of it with her full attention, because the alternative to full attention was the kind of distraction that people around you noticed, and she could not afford to be noticed. She drove to the storage facility at 1:50. Declan was already there, in a unit at the back of the second row. The door rolled up just enough to get in. She ducked under, and he rolled it back down, and they stood in the clean, dry dark, with a card table, 2 folding chairs, a battery lantern, and something that changed the shape of everything else in the room. 3 expanding file folders laid out flat on the table, each one labeled in neat block print, each one thick. "Sit down," he said. And he didn't say it unkindly, but he said it like someone who understood she was going to need to be sitting down. She sat. He opened the first folder. Inside were printed surveillance logs, phone records, financial transfer summaries, dense, technical documents that she recognized as the outputs of a federal monitoring operation, the kind that took months to build and required multiple oversight layers to authorize. "Harris Greer," he said. 18 months of documentation. Contact with Barrera Network Associates beginning approximately 22 months ago. Initially coerced, they had leverage over him relating to an incident from 7 years ago, a use-of-force matter that was improperly closed and which Greer had reason to want kept closed. He laid 3 pages out in sequence. He transitioned from coerced to active participant at the 14-month mark when the financial transfers began. At that point, the nature of the relationship changed. Elena looked at the documents. She had suspected Greer for 4 days. Seeing it in print was different from suspicion. It was heavier, and it landed in a different part of her chest. "What was the use of force matter?" she said. "A traffic stop," Declan said with a specific lack of irony that told her he'd noticed the parallel. 7 years ago, civilian injury that was incompletely documented. The man survived. Greer filed a report that omitted 3 material facts. Solis signed off on it. The silence that followed was not short. Elena looked up from the document. "Solis signed off on it," she said. "Yes." She watched him reach for the second folder. She watched his hands, which were steady, and she thought about a man who did everything with steadiness as a form of armor. "Open the second folder," she said, because she understood that this was where it was the thing she had been circling for 5 days. The thing she had written a name in her notebook and not been able to look at directly. He opened it. He laid it in front of her. Raymond Solis. 8 years of documents. Not 18 months. 8 years. Elena looked at the first page and did not look away from it, because she had learned in 38 years of life and 12 years of this work that the things you looked away from did not get smaller. The first page was a financial summary. Solis had been receiving payments, not large ones, never large enough to require reporting, always structured, always through 2 or 3 intermediaries, for 8 years. He had not been coerced. There were no leverage documents in this folder, no initiating incident, nothing that looked like the beginning of an unwilling relationship with organized crime. What the folder contained was the documentation of a man who had made a choice. She turned pages. She was looking for something specific, and she found it on page 14. A personnel transfer record from the Phoenix Division 8 years and 3 months ago. A commendation to bring Sergeant Elena Vasquez to the Maricopa County Satellite Station. Signed by Solis. Attached to it in a different document chain, a brief communication about the value of having a supervisor with a history of compliance in the primary field oversight role. She read the word compliance twice. She made herself understand what it meant in this context. Compliance. Not because Solis had assessed her as someone likely to cooperate with corruption, Compliance because someone with her history, the tattle, the isolation, the years of professional exile, was someone who had learned to be very careful about which fights she picked. Someone who had learned to see and stay quiet. Someone who could watch the station and never ask the right questions, not because she was corrupt, but because she had been burned badly enough once to be constitutionally unlikely to risk it again. He had not recruited her because he respected her. He had recruited her because her wound was useful. She put the page down. She looked at the card table surface. She looked at her own hands, which were flat on the table and very still, which was a choice she was making to keep them flat and still, because the alternative was something she did not want to perform in front of anyone. "How long have you known?" she said. "That Solis was the primary," Declan said. "6 weeks. That you were recruited specifically, I confirmed it 4 days ago, before I came to the station." He paused. "I considered whether to show you this. And I decided that you had the right to know why you were here, and that the decision about what to do with that knowledge should be yours." He said it with a kind of careful precision that she recognized now as the specific precision of someone who had hurt people by not telling them things, and was attempting with this particular person to do differently. She sat with the folder for another minute. Then she said, "What's in the third folder?" "The third folder," he said, "is why I came to this county." He opened it. Inside was a single document, a surveillance report from 10 days ago, detailing a meeting between Greer and 2 individuals identified as Barrera Network couriers. The meeting had occurred at a location she recognized, the parking lot of the county impound yard 2 blocks from the station. The document detailed a communication that had occurred at the meeting, a communication about the upcoming federal review of Maricopa County operations, a review that Declan had been part of building, a review that Greer had been informed of by Solis 2 weeks before the review was announced. "They know about the federal review," she said. "They've known for 2 weeks," Declan said. "Which means they've been moving assets, which means the review as currently structured will find a much cleaner operation than the one we've been building evidence against for 8 months. He looked at her. "Unless we move first." "When?" "Today." He paused. "Which is why I needed to see you today." She understood. The 72 hours he'd mentioned when they first spoke. She had assumed it was an approximation. It was not. "You moved today, and you need someone on the inside who knows," she said. "I need someone on the inside who has made the decision I mentioned when we first spoke." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking you directly, Sergeant Vasquez, not by testing you, not by giving you partial information and watching what you do with it. I'm asking you directly. Are you in?" She thought about a word in a document. Compliance. She thought about 8 years of careful silence, 8 years of watching and not asking, 8 years of a wound that had made her useful to a man who had spotted it from across a room in Phoenix and made a call. She thought about the spiral notebook in her desk drawer and the Crestline copy in 3 places and a photograph of a coffee mug taken in a burned warehouse, because even 8 years of caution had not been able to make her stop noticing when something was wrong. "I was always in," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." Declan nodded. He reached into the canvas bag by his chair and took out something she recognized from his profile. A leather-bound folder, compact, the kind that held document sets. He held it out to her. "This is the complete evidentiary package. Digital copies are held by the Federal Review Office in Phoenix and by a civilian attorney retained as a dead man protection. This is the physical original." He paused. "I need you to hold it." She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "You're giving me the original?" "Yes." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because in approximately 4 hours, Solis is going to find out I'm here. Not because I've been careless. Because I've chosen to let a specific piece of information reach him that will lead to that conclusion. And when he finds out I'm here, his first move will be to contain me. He's going to do that through Greer. And if Greer moves on me before the federal team arrives, the case needs to already be in the right hands." He paused. "Your hands." She stared at him. "You're going to let them come for you." I'm going to put myself in the position where they feel they have no choice but to, he said. Because that's what we need them to do. We need them to take an action that's documented and visible and unambiguous. We need them to step into the trap rather than away from it. He held the folder steady, not pressing it toward her, just holding it. I told you I would earn your trust. This is what that looks like. She took the folder. It was heavier than its size suggested, which she supposed was what 8 months of federal investigation felt like in your hands. She held it and thought about trust and traps, and whether there was a meaningful difference between the two when both of them were trying to catch the same thing. There's something in this folder you don't know about, he said. She went still. One document, page 31. I put it in this morning. He looked at the table. It's a note explaining why I chose you. Not the strategic reasons, the other reason. He looked up. You should read it after, not now. She put the folder in her bag. She looked at him, the tired eyes, the steadiness. The man who had spent 6 weeks in Tucson working a case alone because he had stopped trusting people with full information, and was right now doing it anyway, for the first time in what she suspected was a long time. Be careful, she said. That's the plan, he said. She left first. She drove back to the station with the folder on the passenger seat, not hidden, not locked in the trunk, right there on the seat where she could see it. She went into the station. She did her job. She was in the break room at 3:40 when Montoya came through the door with a face that had something new in it. Sergeant, Montoya said, Greer's got Rowe in interview room 2. Elena set her coffee cup down. What? Brought him in about 10 minutes ago. I don't know on what. He didn't log it. Montoya looked uncomfortable in the way people looked when something was happening that didn't have the texture of normal operations. Solis is in there too. She thought, the trap is closing. She thought, I need to be the wrong thing in the right place. She picked up her coffee. She said calmly, log the detention in the system. Time of intake, names of personnel, present, basis of detention. Now, Montoya, before anything else happens. Montoya blinked. Yes, Sergeant. And then stay at your desk, she said. She walked to her desk and took out her phone. She had a number, not Declan's number, a different number. One she'd been given on the last page of the folder, which she had read in the parking lot of the storage facility before driving back, because she was not the kind of person who carried something important without knowing what was in it. She sent one text. Room 2. Now. She put the phone in her pocket. She sat at her desk. Outside the station windows, Tucson was doing its October afternoon thing. The long, flat light coming in low, turning the parking lot to amber and shadow. She breathed in and out, counted to 40 in her head, and thought about what came next. On her desk, the spiral notebook was locked in the bottom left drawer. The Crestline copy was in 3 locations. Her photographs were backed up to a cloud account she'd set up from her personal computer with no connection to department systems. The original evidentiary package was in her bag, which was on the floor beside her chair, touching her left ankle. The thing about traps was that you had to know which side of the door you were on before it closed. She was on the right side. She had been on the right side since the moment she'd read the word compliance and understood what it meant. She waited. The door to interview room 2 was closed, which was the first wrong thing. In this station, the interview room doors were kept open when a detention had not been formally logged, because a closed door on an unlogged detention was the kind of administrative fact that made oversight committees very interested. The door being closed meant that whoever was in that room was not thinking about oversight committees, which meant they had passed the point of being careful. Elena walked down the hallway. She did not walk fast. She had learned a long time ago that speed in a hallway communicated intention, and she did not want to communicate intention. She wanted to arrive at the door of interview room 2 the way gravity arrived without announcement, without a decision that anyone could point to as the moment things changed. She opened the door. Solis turned first. He was standing to the left of the table, jacket on which she noted because Solis always took his jacket off in the station. It was a habit, a comfort thing. 30 years of taking his jacket off in rooms he considered his. The jacket being on told her that he did not consider himself in his room. Greer was to the right, and he moved when the door opened, a reflexive step toward it. A man used to controlling who came in and out of spaces. Declan was seated at the table, hands flat on the surface, the same hands-visible posture he'd used on the roadside and at her desk. There was a cut on his left cheekbone that had not been there this morning. A small thing, recent and the precise location where a hand or a wall might make contact. She looked at the cut. She looked at Solis. "Elena," Solis said in the warm, tired voice she had trusted for 8 years. "This doesn't concern you." "An unlogged detention concerns every supervisor on shift," she said. She stepped into the room and pulled the door closed behind her. "I've asked Deputy Montoya to log the detention. Time of intake, names of personnel present." Greer's expression did something complicated. Solis did not blink. Declan looked at her across the table and did not look surprised, which meant he had expected her to come and had accounted for it. "You're making a mistake," Solis said. He said it gently. He said it like a man who was very sorry about the mistake and very understanding about how it had happened. 8 years of knowing him meant she could hear the precision and the gentleness now. The specific application of warmth to someone he needed to redirect. The same warmth he had used on a 29-year-old sergeant in Phoenix who was isolated and hungry for someone to believe in her. She looked at him and said, "I don't think I am, Captain." Something shifted in his face. Not anger. Solis was not an angry man, which was, she realized, part of what had made him so effective. Anger left traces. "Elena," he said, "I recruited you to this station because I believed in your judgment. I have supported your career for 8 years. I would like you to think very carefully about what you're doing in the next 60 seconds. "I've been thinking carefully about it for about 5 days, she said. "I'm at the other end of that now." She did not look at Greer, who was doing something with his hands that she was tracking in her peripheral vision. She kept her eyes on Solis, because Solis was the room had always been the room, and she needed him to understand that she was not here to ask for permission. "I know about the Barrera network. I know about the 8-year financial record. I know about the use of force documentation from 7 years ago and the improperly closed report." She paused. "I know why you recruited me." The word recruitment landed in the room like a stone into water. She watched it ripple across Solis's face, first the calculation of how much she knew, then the assessment of whether this was recoverable, then something underneath both of those things that was, if she was reading it correctly, a kind of relief. The specific relief of a man who has been running very fast for a very long time and has just been caught. "You think you have enough?" he said. "I know I have enough," she said. "And I know that the Federal Review Team is 40 minutes out." The room changed. Greer moved not toward her, toward the door, which told her everything she needed to know about what he was planning to do with the next 40 minutes. She stepped sideways and blocked the doorway, not with her body alone, but with her voice. "Montoya has already logged this detention. If you walk out of this room right now, that movement is also logged. There is no action you can take in the next 40 minutes that makes your situation better, Lieutenant." Greer stopped. He looked at Solis. Solis looked at Elena, and in that look, she saw the 8 years compressing into a moment. The recruitment call, the first commendation, the quiet backing in difficult reviews, every interaction that she had read as belief in her, and was now reading as investment. Investment. Like a man who had looked at her wound and seen a long-term asset. "You should sit down, Harris," Solis said in a flat voice that had nothing warm in it. Just that. And Greer, after one more second of very visible calculation, sat down. Solis looked at Elena. "The documentation," he said. "Where is it?" "Already in the right hands," she said. "It was in the right hands 4 hours ago." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down too, which was the thing she had not expected. Not the calculation she'd seen in Greer's face, not the performance she'd seen in Greer's face. Just sitting down, the way a man sat down when he was done. "You were the right person for this station," he said. "I wasn't wrong about that. I was wrong about why." He looked at his hands on the table. "That's a distinction I expect I'll have a lot of time to think about." She did not know what to do with that. She stood in the doorway and held on to it, and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that was the right size for 8 years of being used and 2 minutes of watching it end. Declan stood up from his chair. He moved carefully, the way people moved when they had an injury they weren't advertising, and she thought about the cut on his cheekbone and felt something tighten in her chest. He came around the table and stopped beside her at the door. He didn't touch her. He stood 2 feet away and looked at the 2 men at the table and said quietly, "Don't touch anything in this room." Then he and Elena went into the hallway, and she pulled the door shut behind them. She stood in the hallway outside interview room 2 and put her back against the wall and breathed 1 breath, 2, 3, counting them the way she'd counted to 40 earlier. Declan stood across from her, the narrow hallway, between them, the station sounds around them. Keyboard clatter and radio dispatch and the vending machine being argued with. Again, all of it normal. All of it going on without reference to what had just happened in that room. "Your cheek," she said. "Greer," he said, "when they first brought me in, before he thought better of it." He touched the cut, a reflexive check. "I've had worse." "I'm going to write it up," she said. "I know," he said. "Good." They stood there. Down the hall, she could see Montoya at his desk, doing something with careful focus that was the behavior of someone who had been told to stay at their desk and had decided to take the instructions seriously. The station breathed around them. "Page 31, she said. Declan looked at her. He had the look he'd had in the diner, something that was not quite calculation, the thing underneath calculation that he didn't usually let reach his face. "You read it." "In the parking lot," she said, "before I came back in." "And?" She looked at him. The note on page 31 had been 7 lines, handwritten, in the cramped print of a man who wrote fast and revised nothing. It had said, "I chose you because of the report you wrote 12 years ago that cost you 2 years of your career. Not because it made you cautious, because it didn't. Because you filed it anyway. And you would have filed it the same way if you'd known the cost in advance. That's the thing about people with real integrity. It's not a calculation. I've been looking for someone with that specific quality for 6 weeks. I found one, which is rarer than you'd think." She had read it twice in the parking lot of the storage facility with the October sun on the windshield and the city going on around her. She had not expected to feel what she felt when she read it. She had felt it anyway. "You should have led with that," she said. "I know," he said. "I was afraid it would look like manipulation." She looked at him. "It did a little," she said. "And it was also true, which made it complicated." "Most true things are complicated," he said. She pushed off from the wall. The federal team would be here in less than 30 minutes, and she had things to do. Logs to finalize a full written account of her involvement over the last 5 days. Greer's physical contact with Declan to document separately. She had Montoya to brief and the desk officer to brief, and she needed to call the station's civilian attorney, which was a call she would have made 3 days ago if she hadn't been very carefully not tipping anything. She had a full afternoon of the kind of work that had to be done when everything changed. "Declan," she said. He looked at her. "After this," she said. "When it's done, if you wanted to." She stopped. She tried again because Elena Vasquez was not a person who left things half-said when the thing mattered. "I'd like to have a conversation that isn't about an investigation." He was quiet for a moment. The ceiling fan in the break room was doing its loose rotation. Outside the window at the end of the hall, Tucson was going gold in the afternoon light. "I would like that too," he said. "Very much." She nodded. She squared her shoulders. She went back to her desk and started writing the report. The true one, the full one, the one that began. On October 17th, at 17 minutes past 5, I responded to a field supervision call on Route 9, mile marker 22, and everything that has happened since can be traced from that moment. She wrote without stopping. Around her, the station continued its ordinary Thursday life, not knowing yet that the ordinary was almost over. The federal team arrived in 31 minutes. 3 agents and a federal prosecutor, badges out, moving with the particular precision of people who had been building toward a moment for a long time, and were not going to be careless with it. Greer tried to say something when the agents entered interview room 2 that the agent in charge did not let him finish. Solis said nothing at all. The prosecutor had a copy of the warrant, properly executed, signed that morning. Elena was at her desk. She watched the team move through the station, and she felt not triumph, not vindication, something quieter than either of those things. The specific feeling of a weight she hadn't known the full heft of until the moment it was lifted. Montoya came to stand beside her desk. "Sergeant," he said, "what just happened?" "Federal matter," she said. "It's going to be in the news by tonight. You can read the statement from the federal prosecutor's office." She looked at him. 26 years old, 3 years in, looking at her with the particular attentiveness of someone who understood that they had just watched something important and were trying to figure out what it meant. "You did good today, Montoya. The log, the desk work staying where I put you. That mattered." He nodded. He went back to his desk. Outside the station, 2 of the federal agents were walking Greer to a federal vehicle, 1 on each side, the mid-afternoon sun on all 3 of them. Elena watched through the window. She thought about 7 years and an improperly closed report and the particular mechanism by which good people became compromised, not in one decision, but in 100 small ones, each one a little worse than the last, each one made possible by the one before. She was still at her desk at 6:15 when the station had more or less returned to the surface-level normalcy of a place that had been turned over and put back imperfectly, temporarily. The federal team had taken what they needed and left. Greer and Solis were in federal custody. Brandon Holt had apparently spent the afternoon at his desk, looking pale and saying very little, which Elena considered the appropriate response. The evening shift was filtering in, full of questions that she deflected with the same phrase each time. "Federal matter, pending. Official statement, I'll brief everyone fully tomorrow morning." At 6:30, she put on her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked out through the bullpen and across the parking lot. The air was cooling now, the way Tucson air cooled fast in October, the moment the sun went below the ridge. She stood beside her car for a moment, not getting in, not going anywhere, just standing in the particular quiet of the end of a day that had been everything a day could be. She heard footsteps on the asphalt behind her, and knew before she turned who it was. Declan was in a clean jacket. The cut on his cheek looked after someone from the federal team had apparently seen to it. He walked toward her with the unhurried walk he'd had on the roadside, the same quality of nothing to prove, nowhere to perform. He stopped 6 feet away. "You okay?" he said. She thought about the question. She thought about how to answer it honestly, which was the only way she knew to answer things. "I've been better," she said. "I've been a lot worse." She paused. "You?" "Same," he said. "On both counts." They stood in the parking lot as the light finished going out. The first few stars were appearing over the ridge the way they appeared out here, clearly and all at once. "I'm going to transfer," she said. "After the reviews, after the formal process. I'll put in for Mesa or Phoenix or wherever there's a supervisor spot open." She had decided this somewhere between the federal team's arrival and 6:15, not as retreat, as something else. "This station is going to need a full rebuild, and that's going to be handled by people above my pay grade. And I would rather start somewhere that isn't built on 8 years of—" She stopped. "I would rather choose where I'm standing." "That seems right," he said. He looked at her. "For what it's worth, wherever you land will be better for having you." She looked at him. "You're good at that," she said. "Saying the right thing?" "Not always," he said. "No," she agreed. "But sometimes." She looked up at the stars appearing. "The conversation we talked about, after this." "Whenever you want," he said. "You have my number." He paused. "The real one this time, not the federal directory listing." She almost smiled. That's a start. It is, he said. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. Not the controlled, deliberate, hands-visible posture of a man managing a professional situation, but the ordinary pocket hands of someone standing in a parking lot at the end of a long day with someone they wanted to keep talking to. Drive safe, Elena. Declan, she said, and the name came easy, which she noted. She got in her car, she drove out of the parking lot and onto the main road, and then onto the highway, heading north, the way she always went home. The desert spread out on both sides of the road, dark and enormous, and full of its own life, and the stars were doing what stars did out here in the dry air, appearing all at once, more of them than you remembered, like something that had always been present but required the dark to see. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the window down an inch, letting the cool air in. And she thought about the morning she'd be writing a transfer request. She thought about a spiral notebook in a desk drawer that had been a small act of rebellion for 5 days, and was now, as of this afternoon, evidence in a federal case. She thought about a word, compliance, and what it meant to have your wound used as a tool by someone who was supposed to protect you, and what it meant that the wound had not, in the end, made her quiet. She thought about a note, 7 lines handwritten. It's not a calculation. She turned on the radio. Something was playing that was too loud and too fast, and she left it on anyway. Let it fill the car, let the desert roll past. 12 years. 8 years of the wrong station for reasons she was still working through. And now a transfer, a choice, a place she'd pick because she picked it. She pressed the accelerator and the car moved out into the dark, and it felt like the right direction, which was all she had ever asked of any direction. 3 weeks later, she was offered a senior supervisor position with the Phoenix Metropolitan Division. She accepted it. The offer came through the county system, processed normally, no special influence, no hand on the scale. She had checked because she was who she was. On her last day at the satellite station, she cleaned out her desk. She kept the spiral notebook. She kept the photograph of the coffee mug in the warehouse for reasons she couldn't fully explain and didn't try to. She put Brandon Holt's amended incident report on the top of the stack she left for the interim commander, with a note that said, "This one's trying. Give him room to." She drove out of the parking lot for the last time. She did not look back, not because she was running from anything, but because there was nothing behind her that she needed to look back at. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a number she recognized. The text said, "Coffee, next week, Tucson. Still, or are you Phoenix already?" She smiled. She typed back, "Phoenix, Thursday. You can find the diner." The reply came in 20 seconds. "Already have." She put the phone down and drove north toward Phoenix, toward the new station, toward the job she had chosen with open eyes in the late October afternoon that was turning everything the color of old copper beautiful and unforgiving, the way desert light always was. She thought, "I have been afraid of the right question for a long time. I am not afraid of it anymore." She thought that is enough. That is, in fact, more than enough. The highway opened out in front of her, and she followed it.